Hey, good morning to both of you guys. I know it's hard to see because it is still dark out, but some of these homes behind me, just below this hill, were submerged in water yesterday. We did kind of drive around before we picked this location. We can tell that the water is receding a lot of those homes now. We can see more of those homes because the water is definitely going down. A lot of people had to evacuate during a news conference. Officials said residents will not be able to return to their homes for 24 to 36 hours. We know that more than 100 people were forced to leave their homes. Yesterday morning, the Llano River reached its second highest level. It crested at nearly 40 feet. We were some of the first people on scene as the river was rising, and when we got there, the water was nearly to the edge of the metal part of the bridge. The Llano Office of Emergency Management urged anyone living within a quarter-mile of the river to get to higher ground. A few hours after that, the city of Marble Falls started issuing their own evacuation orders. We spoke with a woman who was loading up with her son, making their way to a shelter. Helicopters took off from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see some flooded homes and boats and docks just being swept away by the rushing waters. Right now, there are 3 shelters in place for displaced residents in Marble Falls. Back to you in the studio. Hey, Lauren, yeah, we're just along the river here in Marble Falls, and this home you see right next to me, well, it was pretty much submerged in water, about halfway in the water. You can see that the water is definitely receding because now we're able to see the bottom half, the first floor of this home. You can also see the line of debris that the water pushed up. So that's how far the water came up to this home. Here's a look at some of the video we shot here in Marble Falls yesterday, showing you some of the flooding. You can see several homes flooded along the river. Many homes, neighborhoods, roads were blocked off, forcing people to evacuate. Right now, there are at least 3 shelters within Burnett County. We spoke to someone staying at one of those. He says he tried to grab as much stuff as possible in the short time he had before evacuating. He says the most important thing he can do right now is stay positive for his family. And officials are telling us that people who had to evacuate probably won't be able to go back home for 24 to 36 hours. Back to you. Hey, good morning, Amanda. We're right next to a home that was submerged several feet of water yesterday, and this line of debris beyond this gate gives you a pretty good indicator of how high the water came up. So you can most definitely tell that the water is receding, which is great news here. During a press conference, officials say that residents probably cannot go back to their homes for 24 to 36 hours. Those are for residents who had to evacuate. As you know, the Llano River reached its second highest level yesterday. It crested at just under 40 feet. Some of the people on scene had to evacuate. Those were the residents living along the river. They were urged to evacuate if they were living within a quarter-mile of the north and south banks of the Llano River. A few hours after that, the city of Marble Falls started issuing their own evacuations. We spoke to a woman who was loading up with her son, making their way over to a shelter. Helicopters did take off from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see flooded homes and boats and docks just being swept away by the rushing waters. Now, we do know there are at least 3 shelters set up here in Marble Falls for those residents who had to evacuate. Back to you. Hey, good morning, Lauren. More than 100 people had to evacuate. One of the homes that was submerged in water is this home right next to me. Now, you can see the line of debris on the driveway, pretty good indicator of how high that water went up. Water definitely receding. We can see the first story of this floor or of this home because yesterday we know it was submerged in water. Here's a look at how severe the flooding was in Marble Falls. You can see several homes flooded along the river. Many roads and neighborhoods were blocked off, forcing people to evacuate. Right now, there are at least 3 shelters within Burnett County. We spoke to someone staying at one of those. He says he tried to grab as much stuff as possible in the short time he had before evacuating. He says the most important thing he can do is stay positive for his family.
I tell them that we're going to be okay, that, trust in God and just, what's most important is to be alive. Everything else we can replace. We can never replace life, so that's what I tell my kids.
Officials in Llano held a press conference yesterday afternoon. They said everyone who had to evacuate probably won't be able to go back home for 24 to 36 hours. Yeah, Amanda, there were a lot of evacuation orders throughout the Hill Country yesterday. Initially, we thought we were going to go back to Llano to go live in front of the bridge and the river because it did reach such a high level yesterday. But the water continues to drop, which is good news. And that's why we moved here to Marble Falls, because we know that a lot of the homes along the lake were submerged pretty heavily in water, but that water also receding here. If you take a look at some of this video we shot when we were out in Llano County yesterday, you can see just how high the water got. You can basically see that the water was touching the Llano Bridge, which is something a lot of people have not seen in their lifetime. The Llano Office of Emergency Management urged everyone living within a quarter mile of the river to get to higher ground. And a few hours after that, the city of Marble Falls started issuing their own evacuation orders. We spoke with a woman who was loading up with her son, making their way to a shelter. And helicopters took off from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see the flooded homes and boats, different watercrafts just being swept away from the rushing waters. We do know nearly 100 people had to evacuate. Officials tell us during a press conference yesterday that those people probably won't be able to go back home for 24 to 36 hours. Back to you. Hey, good morning, Lauren. Yeah, yesterday, this home and some of the other homes along Lake Marble Falls, well, at least the first story of the homes were submerged in water. And then this line of debris on the driveway, well, that's a pretty good indicator of how high the water went up. So you can definitely tell that the water is receding. Here's a look of what this area looked like yesterday. You can see several homes flooded along the river. Many roads and neighborhoods were blocked off, forcing people to evacuate. Right now, there are at least 3 shelters within Burnett County. We did speak to someone staying at one of those. He says he tried to grab as much stuff as possible in the short time he had before evacuating. He says the most important thing he can do right now is stay positive for his family. And we do know, based on what officials told us during a press conference yesterday afternoon, that all of those people who had to evacuate probably won't be allowed back into their homes for 24 to 36 hours. Back to you in the studio. Hey, good morning, Lauren. Yeah, we are in Marble Falls. This home and several of the other homes to the right of me were submerged in water, at least the first floor of these homes along the lake. And you can see right here on the floor, this debris line gives you a pretty good idea of how high the water came up. So you can definitely tell that the water is receding. It is getting lower, which is good news. You know, we were in Llano yesterday covering the Llano River flooding and the bridge, whatnot. So take a look at some of that video we shot yesterday. Shows you just how high the water got. It was the second highest level ever. It crested just below 40 feet. A lot of people having to evacuate that lived within a quarter mile on the north and south banks of the river. That was according to officials, forcing people to evacuate. So those were mandatory evacuations. A lot of people here in Marble Falls also had to evacuate. We spoke with someone who was loading up with her son, making their way over to the shelter. Isn't it just a wife? Yeah, now helicopters took off here from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see flooded homes and boats, docks being swept away by the rushing waters. Right now, we know there are at least 3 shelters set up in Marble Falls. We just spoke to a resident who just came home to check on his house. He had to evacuate. He's staying at a nearby hotel. We know this home, also people living in this home had to evacuate. Again, you can see some of the debris along here, giving you a good idea of just how high the water went. Back to you. Hey, good morning, Lauren. Yeah, we came out to Marble Falls because we know that a lot of the homes along the lake had to evacuate yesterday. Now, some of these residents are still not able to go back to their homes. Officials told us during a press conference yesterday that those residents who had to evacuate probably won't be able to go back for 24 to 36 hours. But here is an overall look of Lake Marble Falls and some of the homes that had to evacuate. We have noticed the water has receded receded, which is good news. Some of the residents are kind of going back to their homes just to check it out, but they are not able to officially move back in. Here's a look at how severe the flooding was yesterday. You can see several homes flooded along the river. Many roads and neighborhoods were blocked off, forcing people, like I mentioned, to evacuate. Right now, there are at least 3 shelters within Burnett County. We did speak with someone staying at one of those. He says he tried to grab as much stuff as possible in the short time he had before evacuating. He says the most important thing right now is just staying positive for his family. We've also noticed that the river much calmer today than it was yesterday. Still has a bit of a current going with it, but much calmer than yesterday. Again, like I mentioned, residents still can't officially go back to their homes just yet. We've also noticed some police officers patrolling the area, probably making sure that everything is safe and no one is trying to go into the river. Back to you. I mean, we are seeing a much different picture than what we saw yesterday. A lot of the homes along Lake Marble Falls were submerged in several feet of water. I'm going to have Kyle zoom in on one of the homes, especially that people had to evacuate. Now we were here this morning, and we see a lot of that water has receded. The level is going down, so that is good news. And some of the residents are coming back and checking out their properties, seeing how extensive the damage is. But we know that the Llano River reached a historic level yesterday. Was the second highest level ever. We were there when it crested just below 40 feet. You can see from this video that the water was nearly to the edge of the metal part of the bridge, and that forced a lot of evacuations in the city of Llano. A few hours after, mandatory evacuations went into place there. Marble Falls issued their own. We spoke with a woman who was loading up with her son, making their way to a shelter. And helicopters took off here from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see the flooded homes, boats, and docks that are being swept away by the rushing waters. We know there are at least 3 shelters set up in this area for those residents who had to evacuate. Back to you in the studio. Hey, good morning to both of you guys. You know, Zach told us to come out here and check it out, and boy, he had an inkling that something was up, and he was definitely right about that. We're seeing a lot of damage along the lake here. Meadow Lakes is a small city, but it is technically still a part of Marble Falls. Kyle is zooming in. There's a boat that the nose is up, hanging on or leaning on a tree branch. We see a lot of the trees flipped over, some of them pulled from the roots. Boat docks and boats are just tore up in this area. Thankfully, though, no injuries have been reported. A lot of the homes that were submerged in several feet of water yesterday are not so submerged in water today. So a lot of that water is receding, and this is some of the video that we shot in Marble Falls yesterday. You can definitely see those homes flooded along the river. Many of the roads and neighborhoods still blocked off, forcing people to evacuate. There are a lot of low water crossings in this area. Right now, there are at least 3 shelters within Burnett County. We did speak with someone staying at one of those shelters. He says he tried to grab as much stuff as possible in the short time he had before evacuating. He says the most important thing to do is stay positive for his family. And here's another look of a boat smashed up, leaning on a tree. Boat dock is torn up. So some of the people living in here in Meadow Lakes, a lot of these are their lake houses, but the residents are coming by, checking on their homes. A lot of mud everywhere. Some of the water did get inside the first level of their home. We just spoke to one of the residents who has been busy all morning cleaning up the debris and the mud that is left lingering around his house. Back to you guys. Oh, yeah, Lauren. It's also pretty remarkable just how high up the water got, because you can see I'm pretty close to the homes here. And, you know, several hundred yards away, we've got the lake. We're told the water came all the way up to these homes, across the street, into some of those homes over there. Residents waking up, and some of them, these are their lake homes, so they heard what happened. They're here now, cleaning up the debris and some of the damage left behind from yesterday's flooding. We know this is just one small area of yesterday's historic flooding. We were out in Llano when the river reached its second highest level. It crested at nearly 40 feet, and we saw some of the video of the water and saw it live, the water reaching the edge of the bridge, urging a lot of people who live within a quarter mile of the river to get to higher ground. A few hours after that, the city of Marble Falls started issuing their own evacuation orders. We did speak with the woman who was loading up with her son, making her way over. Helicopters took off from Marble Falls to scope out the damage. You can see the flooded homes, boats, and docks just being swept away by those rapid moving waters. Also, we see boats here and kayaks, boat docks just torn up, flipped over on its side. Some of these boats are leaning up against a tree. Trees have been knocked down. Debris is just everywhere. We know that there are at least 3 shelters set up in Burnett County to help with those people or displaced residents. Back to you.